the idea that yes, we're all individuals, but that means we all have individual responsibility as well, and that responsibility is for the wider community. We have an obligation to each other as well as to ourselves. It's taking away parents' responsibilities and rights, which go hand in hand, and it's replacing them with the state. I understand that people are scared of sticking their head above the parapets, but unless people start to do it, then we're all victims. And I think the more of us that stand up, I often say they can't cancel all of us, it's not possible.
Calvin Robinson, thank you very much for coming to speak with me today.
An absolute pleasure.
We met briefly in London, I think just before Easter. Yeah. We're going to have slightly more, I think, than the 3 minutes that we had together then.
It was a very fruitful 3 minutes though.
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you to say so. It's sort of nice that the boot's on the other foot now. I'm going to have a bit more time with you, and I'm going to be the guy asking the questions. Yeah. Now, you're living in London. People might assume you're a Londoner, but actually you hail from Mansfield, don't you? And but your career started pretty much in London as in a school, and you're a head of computer science. So I just want to ask, to what extent has your background in Mansfield, working class background, your time in school, how much has that shaped your thinking and your political views and the things that you're passionate about today?
Oh, big time. So I'm from all over the place, but I was born and bred in Mansfield. I've spent the last 15 years in London, so I consider myself pretty much a Londoner at this point, although I've just spent 2 years studying in Oxford, so I'm a bit of a nomad. But Mansfield is one of those places where people just say what they think, and they mean what they say, and they're quite upfront, but in a nice, honest way. And I think we've lost a lot of that down south, at least. Whenever I go up north, I realise that people are still normal, which is why it's nice to be here. But in London, we tread on eggshells and we talk around subjects. We never get to the meat and veg, and everyone's become a politician. You never know what people think. So I try to at least bring a bit of common sense to what I'm saying. And people in London think it's strange or unique or special. It's not. I'm just a typical Midlander, really. But being born and bred in the Midlands has shaped my political perspective because my mother was a single parent, a very hard-working single parent, and she always worked at least 2 jobs. She was a school teacher, and then sometimes she'd work in a bar in the evening, or she'd do whatever she could to earn extra money. She ran playgroups, she ran nurseries, and that showed me a work ethic from the beginning in similar situations in our neighbourhood that their parents didn't work, or if they had a single parent, that parent would stay at home, and they'd be on more money than what my mother would be on. Mm-hmm. It was actually better to be dependent on the state. It was better. You'd be better off to not do anything and not contribute to your family, and not to be an active part of the community or society. And I thought, that's back to front. Surely the welfare system should be a safety net for people who can't work. It should be there to support people who need it, but everyone should be encouraged to contribute and to be a part of the social life and the cohesion that brings us all together.
And what about your time in school then? How did that add or change or shape that thinking?
Well, I entered school after working in industry for a good few years, and that was mind-blowing because in industry I was working with people that didn't think like me, and that wasn't a problem. And there was real diversity of thought and opinion. And then I got into school, I got into education, and it was an echo chamber. It was, there was a hive mind mentality of what I would call lefty liberal progressive views, or what's now known more as wokeism. And it was being pushed not just in the cohort of staff, but on the students as well. The pupils were being indoctrinated towards a left-wing mentality as if that's the only appropriate way of thinking. I thought this is toxic. It's not helpful for the young people. It's not helpful for society, and we need to stamp it out. So I started writing about what I was seeing.
Well, we'll come to that. So you've got these various forces that are shaping your thinking, but of course, the other massive influence is your Christian faith. Perhaps you could share a little bit about your journey to faith.
Yeah, and that has massively shaped my politics because I like to think if we're living a Christian life, it should affect every aspect of our life, including our politics. I used to be more libertarian, and now I'm more small c, socially conservative. And I think that's because I've seen the left tend to be massively collectivists. They tend to see that we all belong in these boxes based on our immutable characteristics, and I think that's a power struggle. I think that's a way of controlling demographics, but it's all about the collective. And then the right tend to be based on individualism, and everyone is their own god, and everyone can dictate their own reality. And I don't think individualism is the answer to collectivism. And I think what my faith has shown me is that there's some nuance in between. And call it Christianity, call it communitarianism, whatever you want. But that idea that yes, we're all individuals, but that means we all have individual responsibility as well, and that responsibility is for the wider community. We have an obligation to each other as well as to ourselves. And I think my side of the political divide often forget that. But the spiritual journey has been a long one. I grew up, I went to Baptist Sunday school with my grandmother. It was colouring in and stuff. It wasn't really that helpful for my faith. I always felt like I had a relationship with God, and I always prayed, and I always felt like my prayers were answered. So that was a very important relationship to me. But I did not know Jesus Christ until I became an adult, and I was always searching, and it took me a long time to find him. And I didn't know what I was searching for, but when I found him, I realised that's what it was all along.
Fantastic. Well, I don't know really when you, let's say, came to public attention. I mean, you were the face of a DFE campaign for a while, weren't you, in terms of getting people into teaching? Yeah. But certainly when you came to my attention, I think, would have been around, 2018. I think it was connected to the Battle of Ideas. And I think at the time you were still teaching, or maybe just coming out of teaching, but you were explaining some of the things that you've just explained about the influence of unhelpful political thought on children, and the pushing of one particular political and social set of views. But when we were talking last night, one of the things that you said, we were talking about how some people, you have a secret barrister, you have the secret teacher, you have people who are blogging about stuff or what have you. Yeah. But for you, it was important to own it. There were your words, the importance of owning it.
Yeah.
Why was that so important?
Because if what I'm seeing is wrong, and I think there is a universal truth that we should be striving towards, then I have to put my name on it. And I think if I shied away, there are a lot of people that call themselves the secret barrister, secret teacher, etc. I think that is being embarrassed of what you believe in. And I understand that people are scared of sticking their head above the parapets, but unless people start to do it, then we're all victims. And I think the more of us that stand up, I often say they can't cancel all of us, it's not possible, but we have to affirm our faith and affirm our values. And what I saw going on in education was wrong, and I had to stand up against it.
Well, I think you and I would both agree that it's become increasingly controversial to speak the truth, or perhaps just challenge particular narratives. And so on that basis alone, you're quite controversial, if that's your definition of controversy. And there has been a lot of controversy around you just in recent weeks. So let's talk about that briefly, because in a nutshell, you challenge the notion that the Church of England was institutionally racist. And I think you've been quite open about saying you're not denying that racism exists. You just say that the Church of England is not institutionally racist. And that wasn't terribly well looked upon.
It is annoying, but I do have to caveat it every single time that racism does exist. I know this because I've experienced it firsthand. It's an evil that we need to work on. But I don't think it's appropriate to paint an entire institution as racist unless there's evidence to support that claim. I don't think it's appropriate to paint this country as systemically or institutionally racist, because that kind of tallies all of us. And actually, it's the individual racists that need to be held to account. And we can't pass the buck and put the blame onto society as a whole. I think that's lazy. And I think it avoids, actually, first of all, it devalues actual racism that is happening, that does need addressing, but it avoids addressing the wider societal issues. And quite often people see a racial disparity and assume it's down to racism, when actually class is a massive factor, far bigger factor than race in this country as to someone's outcomes. And we see this across, education is a great example, that people say education in this country is institutionally racist. I'm like, well, let's dig down into the numbers and see, because yes, Black Caribbean kids are underperforming, but they're at the same level as white British kids. Mm-hmm. What is the commonality there? Actually, it's the working class kids, and it's the kids in the areas of deprivation. And if we look at the top end of the scale, black African kids are outperforming everybody. So I don't think there are many people that are racist only towards black Caribbeans that wouldn't be racist towards black Africans. So I don't think it's institutional racism. I think it's a wider societal issue of actually we need to raise the standards for all kids, especially those in working class backgrounds.
So the controversy really that arose, your curacy, which had been lined up within the Church of England, went away. It disappeared. It was put on hold. You know, the vacancies which had been there were no longer there, and so on and so forth, which has led you to this point of becoming part of the Free Church of England. And so you will have seen, you've been aware of the Church of England's views on a whole host of things. Why did you put yourself through the training and I mean, you must have known that there was going to be sort of pushback for someone with your views?
It's a good question. I always knew this battle was coming. I expected it to be years down the line. Right. But the reason I joined the Church of England is because, well, first of all, that's where I first experienced Christ. And I see that as the primary expression of church in this land. It's not a choice. I didn't go shopping for denominations. I just happened to be in England, and the Church of England is the established church of this realm. So it wasn't a case of I want to align myself with these woke progressives. It was just, this is where we are. This is my local parish church. This is the institution. But I think the controversy is being Christian in the Church of England at the moment. You know, the clergy and the laity are, but to get past the gatekeepers, to get past the bishops and the selection panels, you almost have to be shy about your faith. And they seem to have this idea that Christ was nice and never rebukes anyone, who was meek and mild and never stood up for the truth. I think they've got a misunderstanding of who Christ is, and I think they just want to use him as a nodding dog to affirm their political views and their lifestyles, rather than living out the faith as handed down to us in the Bible. They want to live out their faith, their lifestyle as they see fit, and let the faith affirm it. It's back to front. I don't know how to help with that. I wanted to kind of help nudge the church back in the right direction. And I think there are many people that are in that situation that want to reform from within. But I've come to realize that is the Brexit argument of the Remain side. I don't think it's possible always to reform from within. And I think at this point, there is no place for me in the Church of England. I hope there is a place for people like me. I hope there is a place for conservatives, whether theologically or politically, within the Church of England. I really do. I don't see it, but...
Do you think that the move that you've made and the coverage that it's attracted, do you think that will have give people in the Church of England pause for thought? Do you think it will have an influence on them to rethink, or do you just think that they're going to be happy to see the back of you too?
I hope so. I hope the media attention that I gained has been helpful, and my main aim right now is to shift it away from me personally and onto the issue of faith and the issue of Anglicanism in this country, because a lot of people think that Anglicanism is synonymous with the Church of England, and obviously that's not the case. And the reason I'm joining the GAFCON movement is because they affirm Orthodox Anglicanism around the world, and they're very strong in Africa, they're very strong in North America. In fact, today as we record this, a couple of archbishops have come out and chastised the Archbishop of Canterbury because he's been playing politics again and saying, you know, by not coming to the Lambeth conference, you are being unbiblical. And they're saying, no, actually, what's unbiblical is you trying to promote homosexual marriage and undermining core tenets of the faith. That's unbiblical. And this is the reason we are not engaging on this topic. So I think there are very, very important movements that are encouraging, and I want to redirect the traffic towards them.
Did you ever think, I've got this platform on the media, instantly recognisable, maybe I'll use that as my means to minister rather than taking up a curacy and going into ordination and following through on that? Did anyone ever say to you, what on earth are you doing? Sort of not that you're leaving it, but setting it aside to some degree in order to go into to become a pastor?
Yeah, over the last few years, I've been approached several times by think tanks and broadcasters who have offered me, quite significant salaries to drop the ministry and to go full time in broadcast work or media work or political think tank work. And as nice as it is to be offered these positions, it's not my calling. My vocation is parish ministry, ordained ministry, administering the sacraments, and being a pastoral guide to my congregation. That's what I'm called to do. I'm going to, as far as I can, use the platform that I've been gifted to spread the good news, but that is not the goal in and of itself.
Okay, well, the Christian Institute, we talk an awful lot about the importance of being salt and light. We talk about the significance of standing for Christ in the public square. We're often criticised that the stands that we take get in the way of the gospel, quote unquote. That what people need to worry about, what Christians need to worry about, is preach the gospel. Now, we would take the position that, and you used the words right near the outset, that the gospel affects every area of life. I'm just going to do a shameless plug for our Living Christianity series here. This is, please take that with our compliments. So this is a series which talks about being a full-time disciple, how our Christian faith affects every area of life. So we can't partition it. If we're going to follow the full counsel of God, that is going to influence our thinking and must influence our thinking in a whole host of areas. Now, the church can get a lot of criticism about its involvement in politics. Now, we would draw a distinction between politics and party politics. We're not party political. We're charities. We're not party political in any way, shape or form. There would be some who would say, throw the criticism at the Church of England to say, or perhaps the church more widely, that they're prepared to speak out on, let's call them party political issues, but not so much the issues that we would deal with here. So it might be okay to take a particular position on, let's say, taxation, just as an example, or let's say whether particular statutes should be in place or not be in place. Those kind of things are okay to talk about, but don't be talking about marriage is only between a man and a woman. Abortion is wrong. Children need fathers. Children need their biological parents. Marriage is significant for society in a positive way. Those kind of issues, that we're made male and female, we're not assigned gender at birth. These kind of issues, let's not talk about those so much. Is that something that you recognise? And if I can ask you this, do you plan to keep speaking out on these sorts of things when you go into full-time ministry? Oh,
100%. I challenge my own support base on this all the time, because people say, well, the Church of England shouldn't be political anyway, and the church needs to stay out of politics. And it's like, well, no, this is a political faith. This is a good example, living Christianity. If we're truly living it, we are being political. We're called to evangelize. We're called to disciple the nations. And you can't do that by sitting on the sidelines. And we see such evils in our modern society that we have to address them, we have to challenge them. And actually, I'd love to see more politicians stand up for life, stand up for marriage, the sanctity of marriage, stand up for the family, for all these very important issues. And not just politicians, but I'd like to see the church stand up for these issues that we're supposed to be affirming. And I'm sick and tired of hearing bishops talk about Brexit, hearing bishops talk about Rwanda, or being against the latest conservative government policy, but not standing up for the core issues that affect whether it's abortion or assisted suicide or homosexual marriage.
Well, let's talk about two of the issues that the Christian Institute is heavily involved with at the moment. That's the online safety bill and also the broad conversion therapy ban. If people are unaware of the significance of the online safety bill, in a nutshell, we're talking about a piece of legislation which is going to put into law the idea of legal but harmful content, and that definition is going to be the behest of the Culture Secretary. It's not going to be in the bill. It's going to be done with limited parliamentary scrutiny and through regulation. That the big social media providers can be fined massively if they are putting out content which falls foul of these of this concept of legal but harmful. And we've been saying that that there's no free speech protections worth the name in the bill. So the area of free speech is a major problem, and particularly the fact of, we know that big social media firms can often at least be perceived to have a particular line on some of the issues that we would speak on, and to threaten them with these massive fines is likely to lead to let's call it over censorship. So we don't want to get these big fines, so we err on the side of caution, so we suppress some of the content which, as is defined, is legal, but someone is saying it's harmful. I don't know how familiar you are with this, Bill, so I realise I'm putting you on the spot a little bit. But is this something that you're aware of, that you're concerned about, and what are the concerns that you would see from it?
I'm massively concerned about this. Nadine Dorries follows me, so I've pinged her about this issue. It's censorship. That's all it is. Directly censorship. This idea that something is legal but considered harmful, such a subjective term. Who defines what's harmful? I like the approach that Poland have taken with social media, and they said you cannot ban or remove someone from these platforms, because these, Twitter, Facebook, they're not just private companies now. They hold the keys to the information superhighway. They are the public square. They are the marketplace of ideas. So Poland have said, well, actually, you can't remove someone from these platforms unless they are breaking the law. And I think that's a much better approach, and they'll actually fine you for censorship if you remove someone for saying something.
Have you ever been removed from Twitter? Have you ever been subject to a Twitter ban?
I actually haven't been banned from Twitter yet, surprisingly. Whenever I go on a show or a podcast, people always say, do you want to promote your Twitter? And I never ever do, because I think I don't want to be reliant on it, because it could be gone like that, and I suspect it will be at some point. I've been banned from TikTok a lot.
Do you TikTok yourself?
I do. I put my clips up on there only for the fact that it's full of debauchery, degeneracy, horrible cultural subversion, and I think it's important to expose young people to different views. So I put up conversations about race or gender or trans issues and all this stuff. I take my clips from GB News and I put them on there. So I don't really have much engagement, but I think it's vital to get that exposure. But I've been banned for so many things, just for saying, a man is an adult human male. That is enough to get you banned on TikTok. That's how far they've gone. Scientific facts are considered harmful, and this will be the case. We've seen crazy laws being proposed in Scotland along similar lines. I do think at some point prayer will become illegal and/or censored under these kind of bills, and we have to fight it with everything we've got.
Well, let's come on to exactly that example, because that's the next piece of legislation I want to talk to you about. I should just say that, of course, if anyone's unclear about some of the specifics on the online safety bill, we've got a leaflet on it. It's available on our website to download, as is the next issue, which is the broad conversion therapy ban. Now, you have joined the Christian Institute-led campaign, the Let Us Pray campaign, letaspray.uk.
Yeah.
Can you just explain why you've joined the campaign?
Absolutely. Again, it's such an important one, because corrective rape, electrocution, these things are already illegal. Because they are, because we think they are abhorrent and they're wrong. So they're against the law already. So first of all, this idea of conversion therapy doesn't make much sense unless you look at the wider picture. And what they're including in there is therapy and prayer. And they say, well, we don't want people to be coerced into changing their life. But what this actually does in practice is it prevents people reaching out for support. If you're looking to go to church and ask for people to pray for you because of your lifestyle or situations, people will be reticent about doing so, because again, it could be in breach of this law. So what we're doing is we're shutting down people's support structures, and we're actually harming, quite objectively, people through this legislation.
Yeah, I mean, the ordinary work of churches, so the preaching, prayer, pastoral care, the stuff that churches have been doing for generations, comes into the scope of this bill. Parents at home who are telling their kids, no, puberty blockers are bad, they're experimental treatments, this is not a route for you to go down, they come into the scope. I mean, I'm sure you'll be familiar with this. The state of Victoria in Australia has put a ban in place, which is being held up as some sort of gold standard on this issue, which is criminalising parents who would steer people who wouldn't affirm a sort of a trans route. And that is being held up by these campaigners as something that this is the route that we should go down. It's
taking away parents' responsibilities and rights which go hand in hand, and it's replacing them with the state. It's taking the child out of parents' arms and putting them in the arms of the state. That's what it's doing, in saying that parents cannot pass their values on to children because those values might be inappropriate for the given age of 2022. The state knows best what values should be given to children. And that's what we're seeing in schools, in education, that's what we're seeing in this legislation. It is fundamentally breaking down the family units, and this is the result of long-term infrastructure being taken over by neo-Marxists.
I mean, you've got a broad network. You're in the media, you're in the spotlight. You've got a lot of Twitter followers. On perhaps either or both of those bills, what is your sense of just awareness generally of what the conversion therapy ban, the online safety bill, could mean? Do you think people are aware of it, or do you think it's...
No. People don't get it. It's because we've lost all nuance. Nothing is nuanced anymore. Everything is just hyperbole. And they paint these things in a virtue signaling wrapper. So of course everyone wants to be against forced conversion therapy. Of course people want to be against the idea of forcing homosexual people to become straight or transgender people to get in line with their actual gender. Of course, that sounds like a good thing that everyone should back. But when you break it down and look what the legislation is actually promoting, it's not that. But what I found disappointing is that the vast majority of the church, the establishment, has been in support of this. I signed one of these petitions against conversion therapy bill, thinking this, of course, this is something the church should take a stand on.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we were demonized quite publicly by high-profile members of the clergy, and people saying these people are monsters. And I'm like, have you not read it, or do you not care, or are you no longer on our side? I don't know what's going on here. It's been a massive surprise to me.
Yeah, I interviewed a couple of the co-authors of at least one of the letters which went into to government on the conversion ban issue, and having gone public, they were sharing just some of the vitriol that they'd received. Well, we started off talking a bit about education. I want to come back round to that. So education is a big area for us, massive area of work. We'll be getting sort of 200 plus people contacting us, parents, governors, head teachers, contacting us over the course of a year. Lots of that is on LGBT issues. I mean, it's Pride Month at the moment. Certainly last year, there was a significant amount of contact for that. Not just those issues, though. People interested in about how to use what's in the law to promote marriage, man-woman marriage. Parents concerned about what's being taught in sex ed, in whatever form that might take, whether it's relationships education, out-and-out sex education, relationships and sexuality education, depending upon which jurisdiction you're in. And we're able to help them and how the law and what's in guidance can help them, because it's not always as bad as it might seem. Now, you, as said, you were a teacher, you were a senior teacher for a while, and came out of that given various concerns. Time has moved on. How concerned are you now in terms of, with the passage of time and looking back, about schools and what is being taught, not just in RSC, but just more generally in the curriculum? What's your concerns for the school children of today?
Massive concerns, and I'll get to it, but I just want to address the language that's being used by the woke or the left or whatever you want to call them, because we've talked about conversion therapy, and it's no coincidence that they're using the word conversion, because it's our job to lead people to Christ so that he can convert their hearts.
Amen, yeah.
And you talked about pride, and it's no coincidence that they're celebrating a month of sin. And just saying that is controversial, but what they're doing is subverting our culture by weaponizing the language. And it's the same in schools. I often talk about the idea that racism, when I was growing up, was discrimination or prejudice against someone based on the color of their skin. And now racism is a power dynamic between white people and BAMEs or non-white people. And they're winning the battle because they are setting the conditions for the war. They are winning by default because they're writing the terms and we're playing them at their own game. I think we need to take back control of our language first and foremost, and we need to teach kids. Well, first of all, we need to give them hard copies of the not just the Bible, but the dictionary. The way that the language can be rewritten under our noses is terrifying to me, because if we don't know what the words mean, how can we argue on them? We don't have any common ground.
Well, we're going to take some questions. I haven't seen them, and you haven't seen them,
Cool.
but we'll see what people have to say. Let's start with a nice, easy one. Are you going to continue as a presenter on GB News? Presumably that's in relation to you taking up your post as a curate.
Yes, I will. I've been in full-time education for the last 2 years and managed to balance that and the media. So now I'm out of education. I'm going to replace my full-time role as my parish ministry, and I'm going to dial down my media a bit. So I will have one show a week when that launches. But people in line with that question, people keep asking, will you be streaming the services, and will that be going either on GB News or on YouTube or something? And I don't think I will be, at least for the time being, because I really want my church to be centred or rooted in a place and a community, and I want it to grow around that community.
Excellent. How do you see the future of the Church of England? And I'm going to assume that means not the Free Church of England,
Yes,
it's the mainstream Church of England.
It is and has been in managed decline for years, for decades actually, since the start of the 20th century at least. And wokeness wasn't a thing back then, but political correctness has grown and grown into wokeness, and it's been moving away from the faith for a long time, heading towards apostasy. I do think that people within the hierarchy see that, and I honestly do think that they want the Church of England to be this perfectly embalmed liberal corpse. They do want to leave behind a nice, pretty picture, which is why they're jumping on board with all of these woke bandwagons, and why they are, the vast majority of the bishops that get promotions now are ones with experience of closing down churches, including the Archbishop of York, because it's managed decline, and they're no longer, they don't have hope in the faith. And it's a great shame. So I don't know if it will last another decade, especially when we enter a new sovereignty, a new monarchy.
I don't know if this is coming over on screen, but your body language as well as your tone just says that you're very, very sad about this.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the conversations I had with the Bishop of London, she was like, "Why are you always criticising the church?" I was like, well, because I love the church. The church is Christ's body on earth, and we're supposed to want it to do good works. And if it's not, then we have to speak up about it. And I can't sit by and watch this, what looks like nonsense being peddled left, right, and centre. Like, where is the faith? And it comes from a place of love.
That's one of the things which I suppose we skirted around, but in our previous conversation, I suppose is this fear of owning the truths of Scripture.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something that you would recognise, I suppose.
Absolutely. I think, the congregations and the clergy are faithful, loyal, good people. The hierarchy of the bishops tend to be embarrassed to be Christians. They tend to be embarrassed of the faith, of our tradition, of our doctrines, and they don't want to publicly affirm them because it might offend someone that doesn't subscribe to them. I think that's, again, it's stupid. It's back to front. We should be out there spreading the good news. It's quite literally what we're called to do. And I don't know how they can stay in office if they're ashamed of what they're supposed to be standing for.
Okay. Christians have a range of views on politics. How can we debate and disagree amongst ourselves over politics without falling out with each other?
We just have to remind ourselves to disagree well, and it's the commonality that's important. So when I'm talking in the secular square, I'm talking about the things that bring us together, being our Britishness. But if we're debating politics amongst Christians, we've got a very easy common ground in our faith, and we've got to remind ourselves of our identity is in Christ first and foremost. The rest of the stuff is unimportant, but of course we can discuss it, and we should do so and reach a amicable agreement or disagreement.
Calvin Robinson, thank you very much for the time that you spent with us today.
Thank you.